Welcome to this WiseOwl Power BI tutorial. In this video, we'll explain briefly how to connect a Power BI report to a shared data set on a Power BI report server. We'll start by quickly showing you how to create a shared data source and a shared data set, and then show you how easy it is to use a shared data set in a paginated report. We'll then explain the fairly awkward process of connecting a Power BI report to the same shared data set before we deploy the report and view it in the web portal, and then show you how you configure a scheduled refresh of the dataset to make sure that the data stays up to date. So let's get started. You may already be familiar with the concept of shared datasets and shared data sources in the context of paginated reports. It's a topic we've covered previously in our Report Builder tutorial. We have a separate video about this in the context of Report Builder. The idea of a shared dataset is it can feed multiple paginated reports so that you don't have to waste time creating the same dataset multiple times. These two paginated reports both get their data from the same shared dataset. You can also make a Power BI report get its data from a shared dataset deployed to a report server, although it's a little trickier than it could be, I suppose. But this video is going to take you through the process as quickly as possible to show you how to get started with that. To begin with, we'll need to create a shared data source that the shared dataset can use. We do already have a shared data source, but I'd like to take you through the entire process, so we'll create a new one from scratch. So from your Power BI web portal, you can choose the New button up at the top and then click Data Source. We can give our data source a sensible name. Let's call this one Movies 2, not the most inventive name, but it will help us distinguish it from the one that already exists. We can add a description optionally, but the most important thing here is setting the connection string. So the server we're going to use is our local instance of SQL Server 2017. So I'm going to set the data source, so we'll say data source equals ./SQL 2017. We'll then set the initial catalog property to point to the movies database. So we can type in a semicolon and then say initial catalog, and then we can make that equal to movies. When we've entered that data, we can choose the credentials used to connect to the database. I'm going to use my own personal credentials, the user viewing the report. So we can click the test connection button there, make sure the connection succeeds, and then click the create button to create our new shared data source. Now we can use that data source to create a new shared data set. To do that, we can head up to the New button again in the Power BI web portal, and then choose Data Set from the list. At this point, you'll need to make sure you've got a copy of SQL Server Report Builder, which you can either download from the download button up here at the top. You can download Report Builder, or when you choose to create a new data set, it will prompt you to get it if you don't already have it. So there's a little button there just sitting behind this dialog box that says Get Report Builder. I've already got it installed, so I'm going to click the Allow button here to open up SQL Server Report Builder. It requires a connection to the report server, and it hasn't already connected yet, so I'm going to click the Yes button to connect it to my Power BI report server. I then need to browse to choose the shared data source that I want to use. So I'm going to click the Browse link down here at the bottom, and then connecting to the report server for Power BI, I can choose my Movies 2 data source. I can then click Open, and then select that data source in the list, and then click Create. At this point, I'll be taken to a basic dialog for building a simple dataset. Let's head to the list of tables here first of all, and let's choose some basic fields from some of these tables. Let's go with the certificate table and pick the certificate field. Then we can head to the film table and expand that. We'll choose title, release date, let's have runtime minutes, Oscar nominations and Oscar wins. And then last of all, let's head to the genre table and select the genre field as well. I'll also add a basic filter so that I only see films which actually won Oscars. So I'm going to head to the little filters button down here, and then I'm going to change the field that's provided for me to select the Oscar wins field. And I'll check that that is more than, and then in the value box, type in a value of 0 and press enter. At that point, I can quickly test the query works by clicking the Run Query button and see a set of results down there, which looks pretty good. And then all I need to do is save the dataset. So I'll save that. I'm going to save it to the report server, of course. And then I'll call this one, let's call this one Oscar winning films. So at that point I can click save. And then all I need to do is close down that dialog box, close down the extra message that appeared when I started to create the dataset in the first place, And then if I simply refresh my homepage for the web portal, I'll see my new Oscar-winning films dataset appears in the page. Using a shared dataset to create a paginated report is incredibly simple. If I head back to the New button again in the Power BI web portal and choose to create a new paginated report, I'll allow Report Builder to run again, and then when it opens, I will click to create a blank report, and then if I right-click on my Datasets folder in the Report Data window and choose Add Dataset, I can simply choose to use a shared dataset. I'll need to browse for where it's stored, so I can click the Browse button down here and connect it to my Power BI report server. So I can just select my Oscar-winning films dataset, choose Open, make sure it's selected in the list, and then click OK. And I'm already presented with a list of fields. I can then go away and start adding visualization, so I can insert a table, for example, and I can display some of those fields in my basic table fairly simply. Let's go for runtime minutes and Oscar wins. It's not very beautiful, I admit. It's a fairly basic looking report, but it will serve our purposes of demonstrating how easy this is to do. So if I just get rid of my title text box, move my table up to the top, give the report a quick run so that I can see that it is indeed returning my Oscar-winning films. There it is. Back to the design view, I'll then just save the report, and then I can give this report a name. Let's call it Paginated Oscar Winners. And then if I save that, I can then close down the Report Builder application, close down the extra message that appeared, and then again if I refresh my web portal, I'll see I get a new paginated report sitting in there using my shared data set, and it all works fairly nicely and simply. Using that shared data set in a Power BI report is a little trickier. Let's start by opening up the Power BI desktop application configured for Power BI Report Server. So if we open that from my Start menu, and then while that's opening, let me point you at a couple of basic resources. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail here. I just want to get to the end point, which shows us how to connect to that shared data set. But for future reference, what we're going to be doing is using an OData connection, which allows us to use the REST API for Power BI Report Server. There's a bit of basic background information here on the Microsoft Docs website. And there's also a nice article which explains this in slightly more plain English. This is by Chris Webb. He's got a nice blog on how the basics of this work. The full documentation, Chris Webb's got a link here to the full documentation for the REST API for Power BI Report Server. So this is the full documentation which explains in hideous technical detail how each little thing works. And then there's a little bit more background information about OData in general. So all those websites are sort of helpful for learning the background of what we're doing here. What we'll do in our Power BI desktop application is start by closing down that splash screen, and then we can head to the Get Data button and choose to get data from an OData feed. Next, we need to provide the URL that allows us to connect to the dataset and retrieve its data. The first part of that URL is quite simple. It's the same as the one you use to browse to your Power BI Report Server web portal. So if I head back to the web portal and then just select the first part of this URL up to the reports PBI, so everything up to but not including the browse section, so I can copy that, head back to Power BI desktop, and then paste that first part of the URL in. For the next part of the URL, let's have a look at one of those web resources I was just showing you. If we have a look at Chris Webb's blog, first of all, there's a little sample URL here to connect to the REST API for Power BI Report Server. So after the reports folder, you can say API v2.0. You'll also see that in the official documentation, so in towards the top of this page here, after the reports folder, the base path to connect to this REST API is API v2.0. So I'm just going to copy that at this point and then head back to my dialog box in Power BI Desktop and then paste that in API/v2.0. For the next part of the URL, I need to refer to the Datasets folder, followed by the path of the specific dataset I want to get. And again, you can see some of that information in the documentation for the API. If I look at this list of extra folders on the left-hand side here, I can scroll down and I can see the Datasets folder. So I can type in a / followed by Datasets. Then in some round brackets, I can pass in either the ID or the path of the dataset I want to reference. So what I'm going to do is head back to the dialog box and type in another /, type in the word Datasets, and then open some parentheses. And in order to refer to this by a path, which is slightly easier, it's easier to see which dataset you're referring to if you put in its actual name rather than its GUID. I need to type in the path keyword followed by equals, and then in some single quotes, /, and then the name of my shared dataset, which was called Oscar Winning Films. At that point, I can close the single quotes, and then I can close the round brackets. And the very last thing I need to do to get access to the data in that dataset is type in / followed by data. The last thing I need to do before actually connecting to this dataset is to head to the advanced mode and then check the box that says include open type columns. Without this, all I would have available in my imported data would be a column containing the unique ID of each individual row, which isn't particularly helpful. So if we check that box, we'll get access to the actual data stored inside each row. Okay, so at this stage, we should be able to just click OK to have the OData feed connect to that data set. And it takes a little bit of worrying, but there we go. There's our reference to our Oscar winning films data set. So what I was just talking about there, without the checkbox that we've just checked, all we would have there is the ID column. Now that we've checked the open type columns, we've got access to the actual data stored in there. So at this point, what we'll do is we'll edit the query so that we can extract the individual bits of information stored in each record. So click Edit, and then we'll open up the Power Query Editor. The first thing we can do is click the little button at the top of the More Columns column to expand all the data from each record. So it shows us that we've got access to all the columns we selected in the query builder earlier on. We don't want to prefix each column name with the name of more columns. So I don't want to see more columns.certificate, more columns.title. So let's just uncheck that box there. At that point, we can click OK, and that will separate out the record into its individual component parts. Now that we've done that, we can start configuring the data types of the different columns. They're all set to general at this point, so we should be a little clearer about which data types we're using to help us build the visuals. So let's set certificate to be text, and the same for title. I'll just skip over the release date for the moment, and you'll see why when we come back to that. Runtime minutes I'm going to set to be a whole number, likewise for Oscar nominations whole number, Oscar wins whole number, and genre we'll set that to be text. The release date column is a little trickier to format into a date time value because of the locale that I'm currently using. My current locale is English United Kingdom, which is going to look for dates formatted as day, month, year, which will work fine for some of my dates. So 6/11 could easily be interpreted as the 6th of November, although actually Jurassic Park was released on the 11th of June. So although it would work for that date, it would give me the wrong result. It wouldn't work at all for things like King Kong, so I couldn't interpret the 12th day of the 14th month as a date time value. So that one would return an error. So what I'm going to do first is use the locale setting to change this release date into a date time with a United States English locale. So if I click the data type button and then choose the using locale option, when the next dialog box appears eventually, any minute now, there we go, we can choose to convert this into a date time value. So it's date time because I've got a time component associated with it. And then I can change the locale to say English United States. So that will look for dates formatted with a month, day, year style. So English United States, then I can click OK, and all of my dates get successfully converted. They're converted back into the locale that I'm currently using. So I've got 11th of the 6th and 14th of the 12th, which looks perfectly acceptable to me, being in the UK. But what I also like to do at this point is just get rid of the time component as well. So let's just change the type of this one more time so it goes back to being just a date. So we get rid of the time component, and that's all the data modeling or all the data cleaning up we'd like to do. So at this stage, let's click Close and Apply to apply all those query changes back to the report, load all the data into the model, and we'll end up with, eventually, our list of fields available for building visuals. Let's just add a couple of basic visuals to the report so we can see something before we deploy it to the report server. Let's add in the title field to get a basic table, and then maybe the release date, and then maybe runtime minutes and Oscar wins. I'll just change the release date to show me the date rather than the date hierarchy as well. So let's just change that so we use the release date field rather than just the entire date hierarchy. I'll just resize the table a little bit. And then next door to that, let's just stick in a basic chart which shows the total runtime broken down by, let's break it down by certificate. So if I add in, let's go with the basic pie chart, and we'll stick in the certificate field and then add the runtime minutes, and that gives me the total runtime for films with different certificates assigned. We can then filter the table just by clicking on a piece of pie, so that just shows me the items in the table matching that certificate. So that's fairly basic, but it's good enough to demonstrate what we're trying to demonstrate here. Okay, so at this point we can choose to save our report to the report server. So let's head to the File menu and choose Save As, and then choose Power BI Report Server. We get to pick the report server where we want to deploy it to. So in my case, that's the first one in the list. So I can select that and then click OK. And then we can choose a name for the file. So let's call this, what should we call this one? Oscar Winners Shared Dataset Report, or something like that. It's a bit of a long-winded name, but it indicates what we designed the report to demonstrate in the first place. So we can click OK, and then the report will be saved. And then when it has been finished, excellent, we can close down that little bit of information, head back to the web portal, and then if we refresh the web portal, we should find that our new Oscar Winners Shared Dataset report appears. And if we click on that, we can view it within the web portal, getting its data from our shared dataset. So there we go. One final thing you might consider doing is setting up a scheduled refresh plan for the report so that its data is constantly refreshed, making sure that you're seeing the most current data in the report itself. Just clicking the refresh button here doesn't actually refresh the underlying data set. It will reload the report using the data stored in the imported data, but it doesn't refresh the underlying data set itself. So to get that to work, what you'll need to do is head back to the home page of your web portal, find your report, and then click on the More Options menu in the top right hand corner, the little ... You can then choose to manage that report, and then on the menu on the left hand side you'll find a scheduled refresh option. You can choose to create a new scheduled refresh plan, and you can give that a new name. So let's call this, what should we call this one? Daily Midnight. And then we can either pick a shared schedule if we had one created, which we don't. We can create shared schedules using the Site Settings menu. But here what we'll do is go with a report specific schedule. So we'll edit that schedule first. Let's make it daily. We can make it refresh on an hourly basis if we like, but I'm going to go for daily every one day. And let's start it, as the name suggests, start it at midnight. We'll begin running the schedule on today's date, and then we'll stop it. Well, we won't stop it, we'll just let it run infinitely every single day. So we can click apply to create the schedule, and then we can click the create scheduled refresh plan to create that scheduled refresh. In order for this to work, by the way, you'll need a SQL Server agent service running. If you're not sure what that means, then you might need to refer back to our SQL Server 2017 videos. But if I head back to the Start menu and then just open up SQL Server Configuration Manager, we'll see if I enable that to run, we should see when the window finally appears that I've got a SQL Server agent service running. So that's required in order to perform the scheduled refresh. The other thing that we need to do in order to allow the data set to refresh on a schedule is to store the credentials for the data source inside the data set. So to make that work, we can head back to Manage the Dataset, and then on the Data Sources page, we can find the section that allows us to pass credentials into the data source. Now, currently this is set to anonymous, which simply won't work. We won't be allowed to connect to this data set or this data source. If we test the connection, it'll say we can't do that because we haven't entered the valid credentials. So what I can do here is pass in or select Windows Authentication, and then I will type in my Windows username and password. I'll blank that out though so you can't see that. And then there we go, so I can enter my username and password. And then if I click the test connection button, hopefully it won't take too long. There we go, I've successfully connected. So I'll save these credentials in the report at this point, or in the dataset at this point, and then it will be allowed to successfully connect on that scheduled basis. Now, although I don't want to wait until midnight to show you that this refresh will work, we can choose to manually refresh the dataset, but in order to demonstrate that it's actually doing something, we'll need to modify the dataset first. So let's head back to the homepage of the web portal, and let's open up our Oscar-winning films dataset in Report Builder. So let's choose to manage it, or click the More Options button, and then choose the Edit in Report Builder option. We'll allow Report Builder to run. And all we'll do when this is finally loaded is let's add another filter to our dataset. Let's filter it so that it only shows films released since the year 2000. If we add in the release date field to the filter, let's select that actually from the list here, so we can choose release date, and we can choose is more than, and then enter a value of 01/01/2000. Having done that, we can just run the query just to make sure that it shows some sensible results. That all looks good. And then we can save the dataset and then close down Report Builder to return to the web portal when we clear that little extra bit of information about getting hold of Report Builder. Okay, so now we can just view our Power BI report again. First of all, let's just have a quick look at the results, and we can hopefully clearly see that it is including films released way before the year 2000. Let's just have a quick click of the refresh button just to demonstrate that this refresh button in the report does nothing in terms of refreshing the dataset. To refresh the dataset, what we'll need to do is head back to the home page first, and then we can choose to manage our report by selecting its More Options menu and then choose Manage. Then we can find our scheduled refreshes page, and then, although as I say I'm not going to wait until midnight, we can check the box next to the schedule and then choose to refresh now, and we should get a little message there about the dataset being refreshed or refreshing. It can take a little while for something to happen. Sometimes the message is sort of delayed, so you don't get to see the when it has actually finished refreshing for a little while. So in fact, let's just quickly switch back to the report itself. If I click on the little breadcrumb here to get to the Oscar winners shared dataset report, when I view the report this time, we should see that it has now been filtered to show only those films released since the year 2000. If I just quickly switch back to manage the report and have a look at the scheduled refresh page, we should see a message saying that it has completed the data refresh and the last date and time at which that happened. So although you can set up the schedule refresh, you can also manually refresh your report datasets by clicking the Refresh Now button on the scheduled refresh page. Okay, so there's some basic information about how you can connect a Power BI report to a shared dataset in a Power BI report server. Hope you found that useful. Thanks for watching. See you next time.